The Trump crime family freak show rolls on. Trump goes down to Texas to look at these wall prototypes, and one of the guys who bid on the gig bombed a mosque. It's like, it doesn't get weirder than this. You've got Rex Tillerson out. I am concerned, and I wanted to get you on about this. I am very, very concerned about this whole deal with Mike Pomepeo and Iran, there's the obvious argument being made that how can you try to convince North Korea that they should cut a no more nukes deal with us when we're ready to blow up our no more nukes deal with Iran rather, excuse me. But beyond that, Pompeo and Trump seem to me like they're hell-bent for leather to have a war with Iran, which I think, frankly, could start World War III. What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, I do believe that a vote for Pompeo in the Senate is essentially a vote for the United States to initiate and lead a regional war in the Middle East. This is a person who's been very clear. He tweeted right the day before he was announced as the pick for the CIA directorship position that he looks forward to rolling back the Iran nuclear deal. He's consistently taken a position in favor of regime change, all of the neoconservative positions that got us into the previous war. And you mentioned earlier on that, why would you do that if you want to strike a deal with North Korea? Well, that's logical. The problem is that the current president seems to be abiding by a completely different logic. I think it is more likely that he will think, mindful of his mindset, that he will signal his willingness to walk away from the deal from the North Koreans unless they give him what he wants by being able to show them, look, I actually killed the Iran deal. So don't for a second think that I'm not willing to walk away from a negotiation with you.
So that would be consistent with his art of the deal strategies, I guess.
Exactly. Mindful of his way of dealing with things, I actually think that there's a higher likelihood that he will kill the Iran deal because he will think it will strengthen his hand with the North Korea.
Well, and here's where that's really problematic. If you're a real estate developer and you're negotiating with a town for a tax abatement or you're negotiating with a concrete supplier, being willing to walk away from the deal is, generally a fairly important part of the negotiating process. But if you're a country and you walk away from a deal, you could inflame the world. It could lead to war.
Exactly, and that's why having someone who knows nothing but real estate is not a good fit for someone who's supposed to be operating in a completely different world in which walking away is not necessarily a good option because, as you said, it can inflate an entire world, and you can't deal with countries as if they're your subcontractors. They're not.
Right. Exactly. So what do we do about this? We're talking with Dr. Trita Parsi, the president of the National Iranian American Council. NIACcouncil.org is the website, and you can tweet him at T-Parsi, P-A-R-S-I. What should we be doing? I mean, if I wanted to call Congress at 202-225-3121, and which is the main switchboard for Congress, and ask for one of my two senators or my member of the House of Representatives, what would I say? Or is that even the path that we should be following to be activist about this?
I do believe that it is a path that we have to follow right now, because if a scenario can be prevented in which Trump is completely surrounded by neoconservatives and warmongers, and that is a much better way of preventing war than any other pathway that exists right now. And Pompeo can fail in the Senate. There are opposition to him on both sides of the aisle. And that's the most effective way of preventing war right now. Otherwise, my fear is that there will be a war, and then the next option is to actually stop that war that already has started rather than actually preventing it.
What is the state of affairs and relations right now between the United States and Iran, and how is Iran doing in the world at large, as a country? I mean, where are they at?
Well, the Iranians are in a tight position right now. Their economy is not doing well. There's a lot of disappointment with the nuclear deal. They were really expecting it to become much more, bringing in a much better economic situation for them. And Trump is partly to blame because he's actively been sabotaging the nuclear deal and scaring away businesses. So that's definitely contributed to their economic problems, though much of it is Most of it is actually self-inflicted, but nevertheless. But this has pushed them increasingly in the direction of other countries like Russia and China. So this is going to be a major problem. And I think for them, the nuclear deal was a test case for two schools of thought in Iran. One that said, look, the problem with the West can be resolved if Iran shows flexibility and compromises. There can be an acceptance and the issue can be resolved. Another school that said, no, the West and regional allies of the West have an inherent problem with Iran. They would never like to see it be coming out of the chains of sanctions and isolation. And it doesn't matter what the Iranians do. That is an unchanging position of the West. Well, now we have a test case. We had a deal, and Iran has lived up to the deal. Iran agreed to major compromises. And yet, in spite of all that, if the deal is killed by the United States and its allies, the school of thought that thinks that, see, the West is inherently against Iran, even when we compromise, it didn't make a difference, that school is likely going to prevail, and the result is going to be that the Iranians are going to be pursuing a much, much harsher policy in the region, because they're going to reach the conclusion that they can never get acceptance unless they force the other side to accept them, not by compromise, but by coercion.
To what extent is the realignment of Israel with Saudi Arabia, with the Sunni Muslim world, essentially, and to some extent, I'd say, it appears to me anyway, and you know this stuff better than I, so please reality check me on it, that even the Trump administration seems to be aligning itself with the Sunni world and in opposition to the Shia world, at least as much as Iran is one of the major Shia countries in the world. What's going on with that, and what are your thoughts on that, and to what extent is that Israeli-Saudi alliance is not the right word, but how does that influence all this?
Well, I wouldn't divide it as a Sunni-Shia thing, because I think it's more about the countries who want the United States to come into the region as a hegemon and support them and give them their the maneuverability that they enjoyed in the 1990s. So you have an alliance between Wahhabi Saudi Arabia and Zionist Israel right now. There's no way to explain that through ideological explanations. That can only be explained from the perspective of the balance of power. And that simultaneously, Wahhabi Saudi Arabia is imposing a blockade, and there's the risk of war between Wahhabi Saudi Arabia and Wahhabi Qatar, because that's the only other Wahhabi country in the world. So I think this is much more to do with the balance of power, in which Saudi Arabia and Israel want the United States to be a very strong military presence in the region. They would be the pillars, the local pillars of that order, and it would be based on the United States paying the cost of isolating, containing countries such as Iran, Iraq, any others who are questioning American hegemony in the region.
Remarkable. Anything you'd like to add to this?
I'll just go back to what we talked about earlier on, which I think, there's definitely a chance for Pompeo not to be approved in the Senate, and that would be one major blow against those who are hoping to drag the United States into a regional war. And
a positive step if we can prevent Pompeo from being approved by the Senate. The number for Congress is 202-225-3121. Dr. Trita Parsi, president of the National Iranian American Council, NIACCouncil.org is the website. You can tweet him at tparsi or at NIA Council. Dr. Parsi, thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you.
It's always great talking with you. It's always informative. We'll be right back.